Thank you and good afternoon. I want to start with my thanks to the Center for Jewish Civilization and its director, Jonathan Lingen, for bringing these families to our campus to speak to our community today, and for providing a platform throughout the year to engage our community in understanding of the global Jewish experience. We gather here today, of course, with heavy hearts, united in our concern for the innocent lives caught in the midst of conflict. 251 hostages were seized in the horrific October 7th Hamas attack on Israel that killed over 1,200 people. It is believed that more than 101 hostages remain in captivity, held in intolerable conditions. Nearly 42,000 Gazans have been killed in the subsequent violence, including many thousands of innocent women and children and hundreds of thousands whose lives have been upended in a humanitarian catastrophe. For each of the innocent civilians affected, there is a family, Israeli and Palestinian alike, cutting across many countries, some here in our own community, agonizing over the uncertainty of the hostages' fate or grieving over the lost ones. There is much to debate, of course, in the long history of Israel and Palestine. Among us and in college campuses across the country, there are fundamentally opposed narratives of this conflict. But cutting across any of these disagreements, there is one essential truth enshrined not only in international law and fundamental human rights, but deep in the moral and ethical sensibility of all of us, that innocent civilians should not be seized, targeted, or held as pawns as a tactic of war. Today, we hear from the family of the American hostages who carry an unimaginable burden. Their lives have been suddenly and violently disrupted. They've been torn away from their loved ones. As we listen to their story, let us open our hearts to their pain and fear. And as we listen to their stories, let us remember that there are thousands more stories of those grieving the loss and displacement of innocent loved ones. The path towards any resolution of this crisis must start by acknowledging the human suffering we see before us, especially among those innocent lives, and reaffirming our shared humanity to alleviate such suffering. So it's fitting that we gather here at a School of Diplomacy, which was founded on the premise that the starting point for bridging difference is fostering empathy for the perspective of others. Let the stories we hear today guide our thoughts and actions as we confront this crisis. Let us call for the release of the remaining hostages by Hamas and for a ceasefire agreement that brings them back to their families and alleviates the suffering of so many innocent civilians. And let us work towards a future where no family has to endure such pain. I'd like now to read the names of the American hostages, some of whom family are represented here today, and their photos are there on our screen. Omer Neutra, Idan Alexander, Itay Chen, who was killed, Sagui Dekel-Chen, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, who was recently killed in captivity, Keith Samuel Siegel, Judy and Gotti Weinstein, Haggai. Now, I'd like to let the representatives of the families share their stories in a discussion moderated by SFS Professor and former Director of the Center for Jewish Civilization, Bruce Hoffman. Bruce and representatives.
Thank you, Dean Hellman. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is a significant and important event. It's the first time that the families of the hostages have appeared on a U.S. college campus, so we're honored and humbled to have you here. We're also honored to reflect on the fact that this building is named after the slain former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri, who was killed along with 21 other persons in a terrorist attack in February 2005 by Hezbollah. Well, what we'll do today is have a 40-minute discussion amongst myself and the representatives of the families, the family members. And then for the last 20 minutes, we'll open it up to your questions to the representatives of the families. Why don't we start by having each of you introduce yourselves and who your loved one is, and then tell us a bit about them.
John? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, first of all, to the Georgetown School of Foreign Service for hosting us. I appreciate the flexibility and the belief in the story and in the shared stories of all. My name is Jonathan Dekel-Chen. I'm a member of Kibbutz Nir Oz, which is on the border, was on the border of Gaza, about a mile. My home was about a mile from the border fence on October 7th, I'm sorry. Our kibbutz was invaded by about 200 heavily armed Hamas terrorists and several hundred looters. As a result of that, my 35, now 36-year-old son, Sagui, was taken. He is the father of 3 little girls, one of whom he has never met. 51 people were murdered on my kibbutz that morning out of a community of 400. Another 79 taken hostage. There are still 29 of our kibbutz members of the total 101 hostages being held. 29 of them are from my kibbutz and Iris's kibbutz. We know for certain that 9 of them have already been murdered. We don't know the fate, including the fate of my son, is unknown.
Iris?
Hi, thank you everyone for coming and thank you for hosting us. My name is Iris. Both of my parents were murdered during their regular morning walk together. We actually didn't know what happened to them for 83 days. So for 83 days, basically we were going around everywhere just trying to find out what was happening. I don't know if you remember, but there was only one deal. And during that deal, we were sure that my mother was about to come out. She is not only American, but also the only Canadian hostage held in Gaza right now. And she never came out. And every day we would wait for a list for Hamas to put out. Sometimes it would be 3 a.m., sometimes 5 a.m., sometimes 9 p.m. We would wait for this list to see if my mom's name would be on it. And every night we would get a no, no, no. And after 83 days, we found out that they were both brutally murdered that day, and their bodies are currently held hostage as bargaining chips, which is incredibly inhumane. There are just no words. And our family is just looking for closure. Basically, you know, in all religions, it's something that must be done to let them come back to burial, give them the respect their souls deserve, give us the closure we need. And also from Sagui's kibbutz, from Jonathan kibbutz, Kibbutz Nir Oz, 1 out of 4 of our kibbutz was either murdered or held hostage. More than 50% of our houses were burnt down. Some with our friends inside them. And only 2 houses weren't invaded by the Hamas terrorists that day. And our kibbutz, whoever did survive, they are currently refugees. And yeah, we are doing everything we can to bring them back home. This is a huge humanitarian crisis, and there's just no time. Thank you.
Orna?
My name's Orna. I'm the mother of Omer. Omer turned 22 1 week into his captivity on October 14th. And we just, it's very hard to grasp the notion that he's going to be celebrating a 2nd birthday really soon in captivity. Omer was born in New York City and grew up on Long Island in the Jewish community. I look at your faces. He could have been here in the audience under different circumstances. He was always this kind of, he is a very friendly person, someone very inclusive and and inclined to take leadership roles. He was captain of the sports teams in the high school, and he was regional president of USY's youth group. And when he graduated high school, he decided to take a gap year in Israel before going to college. And during that year, we have a very big family in Israel. He became and felt very connected to the country, to his peers. He took a gap year with Israeli kids, and these kids were, in Israel it is mandatory and essential to serve in the IDF. And so all these kids were taking a gap year before going into the military, and at some point in time, he felt that he couldn't just go back to his comfortable life here in New York before he did his own share in serving. And on October 7th, he was stationed on a small post very close to Nir Oz. Their job was to protect the border and to protect the kibbutzim on the border. And the morning of October 7th, he was a first responder to the attack. His team was attacked by hundreds of terrorists that invaded the border that morning. And in their propaganda videos from what they did that day, they show his team taken. Two of his team members were murdered that day, and Omer was taken hostage. We haven't heard anything about him since. And the Red Cross has not been allowed access, and Hamas has not acknowledged that they're holding on to him. And for us, it's been an ongoing nightmare since that day.
Ruby?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. My story is similar to Orna's in a lot of ways. I'm a New Yorker, and Itay is 19, so he could be sitting here next to one of you guys, starting his freshman year as well. My family moved to Israel a couple of years ago, and Itay also had that option of either going to the Army, IDF, or coming here to one of the colleges, but he felt entitled to protect the state of Israel, that is the land of the Jewish people, and joined the tanks division. He also fought on a base that was close to the border, where they did what they were supposed to do as much as possible, but at the end of the day, they were outnumbered significantly with this surprise attack of terrorists. We initially did not have any information about Itay and his whereabouts, besides the fact that he was taken to Gaza. Somewhere in March, we got another knock on the door from intelligence folks that said that Itay is most likely not going to come back alive. And we needed to process that, but it's very difficult to process that with just a notification without having that physical component associated to that. Itay joined and is part of 46 U.S. citizens that were killed by this terrorist organization. And I think that should matter to every single one of you listening to us now. And we believe that this needs to end immediately with the release of the hostages that would also create stability and de-escalate all of that's happening in the Middle East today.
Thank you. Actually, Ruby, you provided the perfect segue into my first question. Since the September 11th, 2001 attacks, only one other terrorist incident has killed more Americans than the attacks on October 7th. And in fact, we'd have to go back nearly a decade to when ISIS was active, to when as many Americans had been seized as hostage. Given the gravity of this situation, could you say something about your experiences in raising concern in the United States about the plight of your loved ones and whether they've been successful, where your frustrations have been?
Yeah. So, public opinion here in the United States, it's difficult, challenging for us to control the narrative because, we are few and there are many, many, many others that wish to create another narrative. We, as much as possible, try to decouple the connection of this humanitarian crisis that is not just us, the hostages, but also the Palestinian people that are being held hostage by Hamas as well, to geopolitical issues such as the Palestinian issue. That coupling is incorrect in our opinion and does not help us and does not help bring our loved ones back home.
Iris, you lost your parents. What's your impression? Has this had the urgency and the priority that it deserves?
I think it got mixed up in politics, to be honest. I mean, this conflict, it's a huge Middle East conflict that's been going on for years and years and years, and our loved ones are just innocent people who were there that day, and they've been a victim of a terrorist massacre. And them coming back home shouldn't be conditioned with solving this huge Palestinian issue, which we should, of course, fix. But I think the answer to that and the answer to this region currently is to get all the hostages back home, make sure the Palestinians have leadership that they deserve and not terrorist organizations. And you can hear the Gazans people starting to come out and speak out against their leadership. They are suffering because of their action. And I think the key to all of this is to make sure that we bring our loved ones back home, start to heal somehow both us in Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, and make sure we know this is a huge humanitarian issue. This is not politics. This is our loved ones who are being kept there, tortured for 349 days now in underground tunnel chambers, and this has no time. This is urgent. This is right now. We need them out now. An American was executed a few weeks ago, and there's just no time. There's no time. This is outrageous, and we need to make sure that we solve this.
Orna, would you like to add anything?
I think for anyone concerned about the Palestinian people, going out and demonstrating in support of Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations is not helpful. I think we actually have a lot in common with those that truly support the Palestinian cause, because if you are concerned about the Palestinian people, you should say, let the hostages go, because that would bring de-escalation to the region. And that's something that we can agree about. You know, Hamas is really holding the Palestinian people captive by embedding themselves in the civilian population. They don't really care, and they're using their own people to propagate their jihadist, mission. And if you are concerned about the Palestinian people truly, then you should call for the release of the hostages and for de-escalation in the region and for the end of this war. But just calling for an end of war or, for against Israel without acknowledging Hamas's role in this does not do justice, not to our cause and not to the Palestinian cause.
Yeah. Jonathan?
Well, I'm not really sure what else I can add. A lot has been said. I think this is a storied institution of higher learning. And my day job until October 7th is as a professor of history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. It's my day job. And I guess we have a shared purpose, right, whether it's Georgetown, Hebrew University, or many other institutions, to strive towards giving our students the ability to think critically and to avoid as much as possible empty narratives, whether they're in history, and history abounds with empty narratives, or perhaps all sorts of axioms. Question the axioms. And I suppose my plea to you today as students, whatever your religion, whatever your political leanings, whatever your ethnicities, the folks with the megaphones, we'll put it this way, the folks with the megaphones in the town square in the States and on many, many college campuses demand a kind of absence, in a way, of critical thinking. The subtleties of this horrible situation that we find ourselves in. I've lived for the last 40-something years of my life a mile from the Gaza Strip. In two small, well, they used to be small towns, now they're very big towns, called Abbasan and Irsa, a few miles south of Khan Yunis, which is one of the bigger cities. And for most of that time, we on the Israeli side and Palestinians on the Gazan side did what we could to engender coexistence. It's an important thing to remember. Hamas came along in 2007 and staged a military coup against the Palestinian Authority, and our world went sideways. That doesn't make Israelis sacred, and it certainly doesn't make all Palestinians evil. What it does suggest is that our minds need to be more nimble about how we think and how we speak and how we act around this issue, which sooner or later is going to touch us all. In our homes, in our places of worship, and perhaps even on a geostrategic level, if God forbid, what is currently a bloody, awful conflict between Israel and Hamas can descend into a regional war that the United States and many other powers will find it extremely difficult to stay out of.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
I think it's important. People keep, especially in the States, I hear it, that it's Israel against Palestinians. This is not the war right now. The war is what Jonathan just stated, which is Israel against Hamas. They are a terror entity listed in many, many Western countries, including the US. And it's important that the goal of this terror entity is to destroy Israel and all democracies, including America. So this is not Israel or Jews against Palestinians or Arabs. This is honestly a global threat against democracy. And of course, there's a whole different issue around the Palestinians, which honestly the international community has been avoiding, not just Israel. And starting to solve this conflict is acknowledging in our society, in the international community, in the United States, that Hamas is a terror entity. It doesn't do good to anybody. Not the Palestinians, definitely not our loved ones, and definitely not Israel or the entire world. This is an extremist jihadist entity that's being ruled by the Islamic regime in Iran and with their own proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this is a very, very big threat to all of us. It's very important to remember this because it's not part of the conversation here. And I think it's something that we need to put more emphasis on.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Aviva Siegel, who was actually released as a hostage last November, couldn't join us at the last minute, and her husband, Keith, is still captive. Had she been with us, she was going to describe some of her experiences of having spent more than 50 days in the tunnels. In lieu of that, though, I wanted to ask what your thoughts are about the response of international humanitarian organizations such as the International Red Cross, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, to the plight of your loved ones. And maybe I'll start with you, Ruby, if I could.
Yeah, I think we have a video. We
Yes,
have a video that we could
should be queued
just
up.
give you the backdrop. So 3 weeks ago, there were 6 hostages that were executed, and the IDF put out a video on how they were kept in captivity.
We're going to go down into the tunnel shaft 20 meters below where the hostages were murdered. The tunnel shaft was in a children's room, in a house. Those are the walls of this children's room. Hamas used those letters in the tunnel, and there was a hiding floor. All he needed to do is to break the floor and then go out through the children's room, inside to the street, and go back into the tunnel.
The shaft goes down about 20 meters into the ground, using 4 separate letters. There, it connects to a narrow tunnel with no rooms that is so low you can't stand up straight in it. The tunnel is about 120 meters long and ends in a blocked iron door. This short blocked part of the tunnel is where the hostages were held.
We are gathering all the stuff here for forensics, for intelligence. We can see magazines, an AK-47 magazine, but there were women here in the tunnel. This is their blood. And they were here in this tunnel for weeks or days, we will find out. But they were here in this tunnel in horrific conditions where there is no air to breathe.
Thank you. Please continue, Ruby.
Yeah, so I'll give you a moment to kind of process what you saw and just add that to build a tunnel like that, 1 mile of a tunnel costs somewhere between $700,000. And the amount of tunnels that they built with money coming from the international community enabled them to build a underground tunnel system larger than the New York City subway. Now, what could you have done with that money? You could have built hospitals, could have built schools, you could have benefited the people, but instead they built this underground tunnel system to take hostages and at the end execute them. And when this happened, we, the families, thought, oh, we have international bodies that would support us and help us. The International Red Cross, their mandate that is fueled by US taxpayers that pay for that organization, is to support any person in conflict that has been injured. And they just told us, well, we apologize, we can't go in because they might shoot us. Well, isn't that your mandate? So we, the families and the hostages, basic human rights of getting medical attention, doctors visiting, knowing what is the state of our loved ones, alive or not, all of those have not been provided. And we were stunned that the international community is not demanding that those human rights be kept. So to your question, we as U.S. citizens, have our administration and have done a lot, but where's the outcry? Where's the outcry? Where's the outrage? And we do not see those international communities doing much for our cause, unfortunately. Even next week, the UN Assembly has a session, a General Assembly session. And we asked the General Assembly to have a session about the hostages, not just the Israeli hostages, but all the hostages. And then we got a no on the main assembly. So we said, okay, let's do a side event. But we needed someone to sponsor it. And the fact of the matter is no one wants to co-sponsor it because somehow they feel it's tied to the Palestinian issue and no one wants to touch it. And I asked the UN, what is the UN doing? What does it function in this type of humanitarian crisis? So we are a bit lost on where the international community is.
Orna, would you like to add anything?
You know, it's been such a long time. I remember in the early months, there was such a big outcry, where is the International Red Cross? And we ourselves went to meet with the Washington-based organization. And they pretty much told us our hands are tied. They're not allowing us to go in. What kind of a world are we living in? Mm-hmm. We also know that some employees of other organizations, such as UNRWA, were active participants in this terrorist attack. We know that. And we know that, again, Hamas has embedded themselves within these organizations. You saw a children's bedroom over here, and you see schools, and you see UNRWA institutions within Gaza, and Hamas is completely embedded within all of these. So it seems like we're in a state of moral bankruptcy, honestly. And the UN has proven itself to be completely political and useless to our cause, really.
Jonathan?
I would say sort of writ large, it is mystifying and horrifying that international organizations have made the choice to not intervene and thereby not have to, or to avoid any painful interactions and perhaps risky interactions along the way with Hamas. That's just a fact. But writ small, what I can tell you, what's the price of that? Well, most of us, well, certainly Orna and myself, who we believe our sons are still alive, we have no confirmation because no international organization is willing to demand visits to our hostages. It also means that from my kibbutz, from our kibbutz, everyone know what a kibbutz is, by the way? We keep using the term. Well, sort of, kind of. It's a cooperative, civilian community that is based on cooperative agriculture. Ours is about, there are about 400 people. As I said, 79 were taken initially. A lot of them were elderly people and 2 small little boys. The elderly people are dying there because they are not getting the medications that they need. The young boys, nobody knows if they're alive, quite honestly. That does not mean that we or anyone else should not have enormous empathy for the suffering of the people of Gaza. 2 things can be true at once, and that's the kind of analytical and critical thinking that I'm sure you're receiving here. The linchpin of making this madness stop, whether you came into the room as more of a supporter of Israel or more of a supporter of the Palestinian cause, or you're agnostic. The simple matter is that the only way to stop this madness is not militarily. It is by a negotiated agreement that will accomplish 2 things. It will silence the guns, and it will release our captives. That will take down the temperature in the Middle East enormously, and all of these other peripheral conflicts that you've heard about here, and given that you're the School of Foreign Service, I would hope that you're reading about this stuff in the newspapers and not just getting it on online bubbles. So we must, in order to move forward at all, have to embrace these 2 truths and understand that as critical as any of us might be, And even amongst the hostage families, there are those who are more critical, those who are less critical of the Israeli government and how it's conducted the war. And that's legitimate. It's free game. We can't lose sight of the fact that Hamas, on October 7th, assaulted almost entirely civilian communities, mass killing, mass rape, mass hostage taking, mass looting, and destruction. Hamas could have ended this on October 8th by releasing the hostages. It could have ended this yesterday by releasing the hostages, and it could do so in another 2 hours by releasing the hostages. So I would suggest, for those of you, and it's totally legitimate, to consider yourselves friends of Palestine, you have to embrace both truths, that the Israeli government is intransigent. I get it. We all get it. But that the linchpin here is getting Hamas to yes and caring more about its own people than about this messianic idea of regional, if not world jihad. Until we can embrace both of those truths, we're not helping either side.
And Iris?
I think just emphasizing what Jonathan said, nobody at the UN condemned Hamas. And they've done this massacre, and nobody condemned them. And that thought alone is crazy. 240 people were taken hostage that day. 1,200 were massacred, burnt in their homes. Gas pipes were cut in my kibbutz and put inside houses, and they were burnt down with people inside them. My friends, people who I grew up with, were burnt down. And that hasn't been condemned. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why can't you condemn that and also believe in humanity and, people's right to exist on both sides? It doesn't contradict each other. So I think that alone says a lot. As Ruby said, we were trying to arrange a side event dedicated to hostages and political prisoners. I think we worked on it for about 4 months already. No country would host this just because I want to say Israeli hostages, but really the hostages right now in Gaza, they are from 23 different nationalities. And yet still, because it's so attached to this conflict, nobody would host this. And this is a humanitarian crisis. So I think that speaks volumes, and it's very scary. It's very scary.
We started 5 minutes late, and I've gotten special permission to go 5 minutes over. So let me squeeze in one last question before we open up to Q&A from the audience. Last month, all of us were traumatized by news of the death of the six, or the killing, I should say, of the 6 hostages, including our fellow American, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. How has that infused your efforts with greater urgency and greater priority? And perhaps you can say something about your visit to Washington, D.C. now, if you're comfortable in describing it. Why don't we start with Jonathan?
Well, I think, for one, it brought somewhere, depending on how you measure, the next day, that night when the notice came out, somewhere between 450 to 700,000 Israelis. By comparison, that would mean somewhere between 25 to 40 million Americans going out into the street in one day, to protest, not against Hamas, our own government, and to inject the urgency. So clearly, as far as the Israeli public is concerned, it was a traumatic event. For myself, it followed a week after an equally traumatic event when 6 other hostages, the bodies of 6 other hostages, were recovered by the IDF in Gaza and brought home. Older men, all of them grandfathers, all of them from the kibbutzim, 4 from my kibbutz. I've known all of them for well over 40 years. All of them were alive, at least until January. How do we know this? Because they all appeared in Hamas and Islamic Jihad terror videos, psychological warfare videos that the world saw. What this means is, and when we talk about urgency, I think the hostage families have been talking about this for many, many months. Our own government was kind of deflecting, saying, well, if we pressure Hamas more militarily, eventually they'll come around. Well, Israelis are perfectly aware, except for the staunchest supporters of our very right-wing government, that was a fantasy to begin with. It certainly is now, because the very act of war, whether they're executed by their Hamas captors to prevent them from being recovered, or they die of neglect or friendly fire coming in from Israel, misplaced bombs. Our hostages are dying. And if we don't act fast, and that includes all of us, if we don't act fast, who knows how untold numbers of Palestinians are going to die needlessly, and more likely than not, of the 101 hostages, they will all come home in boxes. That is the sad truth. And God help us all if that's the outcome.
Iris?
I just want to say that even them coming home in boxes is not something we can count on, because, it's been almost a year and I don't have that box. So, as I said, it's very sick what's happening right now. One of the hostages who Jonathan's talking about is my best friend's father. And we knew he was alive because the hostages, on that one deal we had, 40 of the hostages who came back are from our kibbutz, and they saw him. And the urgency, I feel, was always there. I mean, we grew up in a kibbutz a mile from Gaza, and we've been bombed for 20 years. We know who Hamas is. We know who we're dealing with. We know these are not people who value life. And we see it. They don't value their own people's life, and they certainly don't value our loved ones' life, definitely not my parents. So I think that sense of urgency was always there, but I think that maybe it gave the people around us the sense of urgency that we feel every second. Some people, like Orna, we have no proof of life, and the urgency is every second. Every second of the day is crucial.
Right. Orna?
I agree. For us, it's been urgent since day one. And this has been what we've been doing now for 349 days. And I have to remind myself what days it is today, because for us it's one long day. And we've been warning for almost a year now that it's urgent. And unfortunately, to us, it did not come as a surprise. I think, if you were to speak to Hirsch's parents, they will say that hopefully this is an alarm for the leaders that we've run out of time. And the truth is, it's about political will on all sides. We have to differentiate between Hamas, who is a terrorist organization, and like Iris said, has no respect for human life. So it's not on the same level. But the other parties involved in negotiating this deal to bring them out, it also is about political will in Israel, in the United States, to put pressure on the different parties that are involved to get this done. And we really, we pray every day, every second of the day, that they just get it done. It's not happening yet. Until they're not back, we haven't succeeded.
Ruby?
Yeah, I'll start by quoting Martin Luther King, talked about the urgency of now, and that's how we feel. Maybe I'll allude to what we have been doing the last couple of days in Washington, D.C. So we do have unprecedented access to the White House and to officials from the executive branch, as well as to Congress. And at least what we see is that there is no effective pressure on both sides, both on the State of Israel, its government, and on Sinwar. And the question, and this is in diplomacy, like, you guys are, probably gonna study about it a bit. This is not like other conflicts. It's not a state with another state. It's a state of Israel with a terrorist organization. That requires a different set of dialogue and pressure points on a terrorist organization that you cannot put on a state. For example, Iran, it is a state. It functions as a state. It has interests as a state that do not reflect for a terrorist organization. And what we have been calling for is looking at other dimensions of pressure that can be effective. So one way is to say more military pressure, and that is what we, the families, have been told about 10 months ago, that if we just put a little bit more pressure, Sinwar will come to his knees. Well, that has not happened. So let's look at other dimensions of pressure, such as economic sanctions. That it goes back to the international community that to be effective, it's not enough that the U.S. calls Hamas a terrorist organization. It needs to have the collaboration of the international community. If not, money keeps on flowing into Gaza from states that charity funds that just, pull money into Gaza, and they're able to sustain themselves. It's oxygen. So within this very complicated equation, the question is, how do you put effective pressure to put both sides at a place that they need to say yes? If they do not want to say yes, how do you make them say yes?
Great. Well, we still have about 20 minutes for questions. Could I invite students in the audience to line up on either aisle behind the microphone? I'd like to ask a question. Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name is Michael Hassner. I'm from Berkeley, California, and I'm a freshman of the class of 2028 in the SFS. I mean, the events of October 7 and following really polarized the American perspective on Israel, especially on college campuses, as you noted. I'm curious for you four, how did it shift the way you view Israel as a home, as a state, what it stands for? And I'm sort of interested in that because in the time I've spent in Israel, seeing Hamas, when Hamas fired rockets on me and my family, I really felt that it changed my perspective on how I saw Israel. It really strengthened my patriotism as well as the respect I have for Israel as a state. And I'm curious how the events of October 7 shifted that for you. Thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Can we begin with you, Orna?
It's a big question and a really complicated answer. I feel like we're still in this event, so it's a mixed bag of emotions. The Israeli people are wounded. They've been hit and hurt really bad by what happened on October 7th, and what has been happening since. It's like an open wound, and the hostages not returning yet is leaving the Israeli people in a state where they cannot even begin healing. It's like a part of your body is missing, and you can't even start the healing process before they're back. This gets mixed up. The grief, there's so many layers of grief to this. I've gotten to know Jonathan and Iris over the course of the past few months, but every time we sit together and I hear these stories again and different stories of what actually happened on October 7th, it's living that trauma again and again and again. There's so many layers to that grief. And also thinking about Omer. And what happened on that day, the big failure of intelligence, and how he is caught up in all this nightmare, which is a complete failure on the Israeli side as well, which has yet to begin even in being investigated on how that even could have happened. And that part of it makes me angry, you know, and upset and helpless about the fact that although we've been doing this for such a long time, almost a year, speaking up and doing our share, he's not back yet. And I'm not sure that everything possible and every stone is being turned for him to come back on the part of the leadership. So it's a complicated answer.
All right, Iris?
I think we need to separate Israel from the government. Israel will forever be our home. In 2017, I decided to leave Israel because I felt that I couldn't raise my kids in a place where we're being bombed all the time and nothing is being done. On the contrary, we were giving money to Gaza, but it never went to Gaza. It went to Hamas because Hamas is a terror entity and we were feeding its terrorism, and we never really took care of this issue, which is tied again with the Palestinian issue, and this is a whole centuries of a conflict. But Israel will forever be our home. As far as this government, I can't describe my anger because nobody came to our kibbutz for 7 hours. This is 7 hours where thousands of terrorists were in. They stole everything they could. They tore albums from our house, tore the albums. I don't know why, they just did. My dad was a musician. My mom was a poet, a mindfulness teacher. She used to teach mindfulness to children and teenagers to kind of cope with the anxiety of living so close to Gaza and the constant bombing and threat. And they tore some of her poetry books, and they completely destroyed my dad's instruments. And you know, I asked, like, why? And the fact that nobody came for 7 hours, and during these 7 hours, my friends were kidnapped, murdered. Some of them murdered while they were protecting our people. So I'm very angry, but at the same time, Israel is something that's, without a doubt, something that's needed in order for the Jewish people to survive. I think we can all see what's going on right now in the world. It seems like Israel is this huge state, but in reality it's tiny, and it's the only Jewish state in the world. And I feel that right now, because of a lot of our government's decisions, its existence is in stake. And I'm hoping I can come back one day with my family. I currently live in Singapore. But yeah, I'm very angry. I'm sad. I'm everything. My grandfather moved from the United States to, back then it wasn't called Israel. He had a Palestinian passport back then. He moved there because he believed in that land so much, and I will forever cherish the land and feel it's home for me.
Ruby?
Yeah, my folks are Holocaust survivors. So they lived in a generation where there was no Jewish state. And I felt privileged during my time in the IDF, and my kid, Itay, felt the same, and he gave the ultimate sacrifice. So we are always interconnected now with the state of Israel, and it's difficult to process, you know, what does that mean, our relationship with Israel? Like, how does that, you know, evolve? And what I have found interesting is that when visiting various parts of the States, I go to different synagogues, and I've learned something very interesting, that actually there's an increase in the amount of people that want to convert to Judaism. And I'm like asking, you know, those rabbis in the synagogues, like, you know, what's the deal? And a lot of people feel compelled to join Judaism after October 7th, saying, well, look, this is what happened to these people. Now we want to be part of them and join them. So I think, that question that you asked, we need to maybe reflect on it a couple of years from now. What's the outcome of that on not just the Jewish people, but hopefully other people that feel more connected to the state of Israel now.
And Jonathan?
I'll answer this perfectly legitimate question on a completely personal level. I learned of the 7th of October not while in Israel in my home, but in Baltimore by chance. And my initial feeling was just what a colossal failure by Israel. I think most, perhaps not all Israelis, and I certainly in all of the border communities feel this, we were betrayed by our government. There was an unwritten contract between Israelis, certainly those living on Israel's borders, that have always been contested, and the governments of Israel, that we would protect sort of with our very presence the borders of the country, again, as civilians, and also in our region serve as the bread basket and the vegetable basket for the country, very high output agricultural part of the country. But in times of real desperate trouble, the country would be there, the army would be there, and they weren't. This adds on to, or this has created or added on to an enormous crisis of faith in Israel among Israelis. Simply lack of faith in our government that began before October 7th. It began in January 2023. I don't want to get it too deep into the weeds. Those of you who follow Israeli politics know this. This same government tried to push through a constitutional coup, essentially incapacitating our free judiciary. It caused a huge social crisis, enormous demonstrations against this attempt that didn't work. It's only been multiplied by the frustration with our government in letting it happen on October 7th, not taking accountability for it, and not doing what it needs to do, what it must do to get the hostages home. That being said, as painful as that is for me, I moved to Israel when I was 18 years old, 17 years old, from Connecticut. Otherwise, I might have been in one of these chairs studying at Georgetown. But until October 7th, I sincerely believed with all of my heart and soul that coexistence was still possible. I absolutely believe that the grandfathers, like me, in Abbasan and in Ikhsa and in Khan Yunis, whatever Hamas said and did, the grandfathers and the parents wanted exactly what I wanted for my kids. I believe that and have acted accordingly for my entire adult life in the peace movement. What happened on October 7th, not because of the Nukhba terrorists, we never had a doubt who these people were, never had a doubt, but the fact that our kibbutz and all of the other kibbutzim up and down the border were then overrun by civilian looters in the thousands, that has caused me to pause and rethink what the future looks like with our neighbors. Whatever brought them to do that, it's been perhaps, at least in an intellectual way, not an emotional way, but an intellectual way, at least as much of a crisis for me as the catastrophe for my family, for my community, for the country of October 7th.
Great. We can just squeeze in one more question, sir.
Great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Blaze. I'm a master's student here at the SFS. I'm sure I can speak for all the students here to just say thank you for sharing your story of your loved ones and also your personal grief. My question is, what would you like to see in the international community, especially in the media, so that the narrative around hostages and sort of some concrete actions you would like to see from governments? Thank you.
Well, I'll start briefly, and if others want to come in. I would ask them, both media and governments, speak truth. just speak truth and do truth. There are two sides to this conflict. Nobody's a saint here. Nobody's a saint. On either side of the Arab-Israeli divide, and certainly the Israeli-Palestinian or Israeli, certainly there is an evil in Hamas, unlike the Palestinian people. Speak that truth. What in God's name are you afraid of? To amplify that truth. Not for my sake, but for the sake of the Palestinian people. They deserve something better. They deserve not to be butchered in the midst of this terrible conflict that was sparked by a terrorist organization that is documented as being willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of its own citizens in order to create this jihad against Israel. Nobody's talking about that. No one's acting on that. The United States government has been good, can do more in terms of battling Hamas in the financial sector and in legal sector. Where are the other enlightened nations? It's not about punishing Palestinians. It's about making sure that Hamas does not win. Because if, God forbid, the hostages die, and a regional war is sparked, which was the plan all along of Yahya Sinwar against Israel, that is an extremely dangerous model for the success of fundamentalist terrorism. And I'll say it for a second time, God help us all, if that's the case. And that is the responsibility of international media and well-meaning governments. I expect nothing from Russia, for example. But I would expect enlightened nations, liberal, democratic nations, to stand up to this evil and just tell the truth for the sake of the Palestinians, if not for our sakes.
Would anyone else like to add anything or have a final word?
There's something that Danny Danon said at the UN counseling. He said, it's far easier to criticize a democratic government than to deal with the reality of terrorism. And I feel that's exactly what I see and what we see. And I think that, just the example of us trying to create this side events dedicated to the catastrophe and the humanitarian crisis of hostage taking as a tactic and political prisoners, and no country would take the lead and host this. No country, and really we tried everything. Really, thankfully to the administration here, we really have access to amazing people, and still nothing would be done. We're still, I will never take a no as an answer. We will always keep fighting for our loved ones, but I think as far as media goes, language plays a part here. We can all see that they call Hamas militants. They never use the word terrorists, almost ever. They almost always point the finger at the Israeli government. And again, as you heard me, I have lots of criticism towards my government, but we are dealing with a terrorist group. They are a listed terrorist group in the US, and yet that's not mentioned. Even when my parents were declared dead 83 days later, they used the word they died or they were killed or something like that, but they would never use the word murdered, or even about Hirsch, his horrific execution. They used the word died in captivity, but he was executed in captivity. So all these things play a part in this information war that we're also fighting, this propaganda war, because everybody has their own truth nowadays, and no one really seeks the real truth. And it coming back to what Jonathan says, that I feel that we're missing critical thinking skills, and it's something that, it's something that's important. It's important to practice, especially when you're in these institutions. It's extremely important in order to make up your mind about a certain situation, to make sure that you know what you're talking about before you start spreading it and missing critical information that can hurt people. unfortunately, like us, like our loved ones.
Orna or Ruby, anything you'd like to add?
Just one sentence, really, because you covered it all, is that you have a role as young people in this country to share the truth, to condemn what needs to be condemned, to speak up, and not to allow this propaganda to continue. And it needs courage, and we need courage to express this moral clarity. So thank you for being here today and listening to us.
I'll close it up and say, like Orna, thank you for being here. Hopefully we made it a bit more personal and we stimulated some independent thinking and understanding the complexity of the issue. But on the other hand, it's pretty simple. It's a humanitarian issue. And I think we all stand on the same side when it comes to that equation. Thank you for being here.
Before we officially conclude, may I invite to the podium the University Rabbi, Rabbi Ilana Zeitman, to offer a closing prayer.
I'm so sorry you all have to be here, but thank you for being here. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu yivarech v'yishmor v'yinsor et hashvuyim B'toch sha'ar achenu Beit Yisrael hanetunim b'tzara u'v'shivya Ba'avor shehakahal mitpalel ba'avuram Hakadosh Baruch Hu yimaleh rachamim alehem v'yotzi'em mechoshech v'salmavet u'mosrotehem yinatek u'mimsukotehem yoshi'em v'shivem mehira lechek mishpachotehem. Hikuyam bahem mikra shekatuv, ufduyei Hashem yeshivun, uva'ut Sion berina v'simchat olam al rosham, sason v'simcha yasigu v'nasu yagon v'anacha v'nomar. Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, bless, safeguard, and preserve those held hostage among their brethren of the house of Israel in trouble and captivity. In the merit of the prayers of this holy assembly who pray for them, may the Blessed Holy One shower compassion over them and deliver them from darkness and strife, remove their bondage, deliver them from their afflictions, and return them speedily to their families. Establish for them what is written, and the redeemed of God shall return, and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Let me thank all of you for coming. And finally, please join me in thanking Ruby, Orna, Iris, and Jonathan for their eloquence, for their courage, and for their perseverance.